Hi, everyone. So, remember, I said that March is Women's History Month, and we're going to be reading about a couple of really cool women. And the next book that I want to read is called Codebreaker Spy Hunter: How Elizabeth Freedman Changed the Course of Two World Wars. So, that's talking about World War I and World War II, which happened in like the early 1900s and then kind of the mid 1900s. So, let's go ahead and read about how she helped to change what was happening during those two wars. So Elizabeth Smith Freedman, a cryptanalyst with a stellar reputation, agreed to work with the FBI on their top secret project. And once she'd broken the codes, she discovered the senders were indeed spies, Nazis. At the trial, the content of those deciphered messages proved that the hard evidence needed to send 33 German spies to prison. According to the FBI, Elizabeth's work resulted in the greatest spy roundup in American history. And to think, if not for a chance encounter with a librarian more than 25 years earlier, Elizabeth might never have become a code breaker at all. As a child, Elizabeth loved to read, especially poetry. One of her favorite poets was William Shakespeare. His poetry showed structure and patterns, just like she would later look for in coded messages. Fascinated with languages, Elizabeth majored in English literature at college and also studied Latin, Greek, and German. She graduated in 1915 and worked for a year as a high school principal. After that, Elizabeth went to Chicago looking for a job in research or literature. While in town, she couldn't wait to stop by the Newberry Library to see their famous collection of Shakespeare's plays. When Elizabeth mentioned she needed a job, the librarian introduced her to George Fabian, an eccentric multimillionaire and fellow Shakespeare fan. Fabian invited her to join other researchers at his Illinois estate, Riverbank. He was convinced Francis Bacon, a famous scientist and author, was the real creator of Shakespeare's plays. To prove this, Fabian wanted Elizabeth to find secret messages Bacon had supposedly hidden in the plays. Little did she know how peculiar her new boss would turn out to be. Fabian kept monkeys on his estate. He raised honeybees inside his house, the villa, because he didn't trust him to make honey unless he supervised. Most unusual of all, he hung his furniture from the ceiling on chains. The more Elizabeth studied the plays, the more she believed there weren't any secret messages. She shared her suspicions with one of her scientist friends, William Freedman, and he agreed. Elizabeth and William's discussion soon changed from codes hidden in Shakespeare's plays to codes in general. They spent their free time indulging in their favorite game, writing secret notes and challenging each other to decode them. As their code-making and code-breaking skills grew, so did their friendship. Friendship turned to love, and within a year, Elizabeth and William married. After the United States entered World War I in 1917, the government needed people to decode spy messages. Fabian asked Elizabeth and William to set up the country's first code-breaking unit, the Riverbank Department of Ciphers. For 8 months, the American military brought all secret enemy communications to Riverbank for decoding. Elizabeth, William, and their staff developed many new code-breaking techniques and authored 8 pamphlets detailing them. Their methods are now considered the basis for the modern science of cryptology, the study of secret codes. In 1921, Elizabeth and William moved to Washington, D.C. to work as code breakers with the Army Communications Department, the Signal Corps. Until then, the Army had used a simple machine, the teleprinter, to send messages. But if the enemy intercepted the transmissions, anyone could read them, so the Army coded the messages first. There was a problem, though. These machines were huge and could only be used in large office buildings. But soldiers needed to be able to send secrets from anywhere, even from deep within the jungles of far-off islands. Elizabeth and William invented a scientific method to create complicated ciphers, a type of code, using only pencil and paper. Ciphers use secret rules for replacing each letter with a different one. If the enemy didn't know the rules, they would have a hard time figuring out the message. As much as Elizabeth enjoyed the challenges of her job, she never forgot her love of literature. She wanted to write books and raise a family. With the war over, Elizabeth decided it was time to take a break from working full-time. She and William moved out of the city. The first book Elizabeth wrote was about codes and ciphers. She also wrote and illustrated a children's book about the history of the alphabet. While she wrote, the family pets, Crypto the dog and Pinklepur the cat, kept her company. But every time she found herself deep in creative thought, the doorbell rang. Again and again, another government agency needed her decoding skills. This time it was the Coast Guard at her door. The coasties were frustrated. Prohibition laws made it illegal to sell alcohol in the United States, but smugglers didn't care. There was too much money to be made. They carried bootleg liquor on ships and hid from the authorities by coding their messages to each other. The Coast Guard couldn't crack the codes. The so-called rum runners were winning. Elizabeth's decoding ability was the Coast Guard's only hope to catch them. So in 1925, she went back to work as a full-time cryptanalyst. In her first 3 months of work, Elizabeth decoded 2 years of backlogged messages, using nothing but pencil and paper. She was the first person in the United States to use the new science of cryptology to catch smugglers. Elizabeth often testified at criminal trials. During the famous Consolidated Exporters case, an attorney claimed Elizabeth's decodes were her opinion and not science. To prove them wrong, Elizabeth asked for a blackboard. On it she wrote, "Old Colonel," a brand of liquor, and alcohol, 3 words she had decoded from a secret message. Below, she printed the matching coded letters. The same letter in the secret message always decoded to an O in the plain text. This was also true for the L's. The lawyers couldn't deny the evidence before their eyes. Elizabeth's evidence helped convict 25 smugglers, all of whom received the maximum sentence. After this case, everyone knew that cryptology, or code breaking, was definitely a science, not fantasy, and that Elizabeth was an expert in the field. Elizabeth and her assistant struggled to keep up with the piles of work. It was clear the Coast Guard needed a better system, not to mention more code breakers. So Elizabeth created the Coast Guard's first code breaking unit. She staffed it with people she personally trained. As a break from long hours of tedious work, Elizabeth spent weekends digging in the flower garden with her children, John Ramsey and Barbara. Evenings, she might attend the theater or play piano in a musical quartet, but cryptography was never far from her mind. In 1938, she and William held an unusual dinner party. They hosted each course at a different restaurant. Instead of telling their colleagues the names of the restaurants, they gave them clues. If their guests wanted to eat, they had to crack the code. At work, Elizabeth and her team continued to break code after code, often in foreign languages. The United States had entered World War II, and the Office of Strategic Services had a huge problem. They had gathered secret communications from around the world, but they were all in code. In order to keep our nation safe, they needed to know what these messages said. Sure, the OSS didn't have a code breaking unit in 1942, it was up to Elizabeth to create one. She couldn't find enough people trained in cryptology, so she hired mathematicians, physicists, and chemists. She knew scientists could think analytically, a skill needed for code breaking. Although Elizabeth was a demanding instructor, her students gratefully respected her abilities and quickly learned to solve codes. Thanks to Elizabeth, the OSS, known now as the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, had their first cryptography department. Elizabeth's team decoded messages from Mexico and South America that contained secret war information, like the number of planes and the movement of warships. And they were in German. Once again, Elizabeth had discovered messages from Nazi spies. The FBI director was eager to catch the spies, but Elizabeth thought they should wait until the military could learn more of the enemy's secrets. The director ignored her suggestion and ordered a raid. Not all of the spies were captured, and the ones who escaped scurried away. Their codes had been broken, so of course they immediately changed them. This made their messages much harder to decrypt. The FBI director grabbed all the credit for deciphering the codes and capturing the spies. Elizabeth and her team received none. She patriotically continued to crack codes for the FBI, never receiving the recognition she deserved. Soon after Elizabeth helped to capture the Nazi spies, the United States Postal Service needed her skills. They had seized letters from a suspected American spy, Belva Lee Dickinson. On the surface, her letters appeared to be about buying and selling cute little dolls for children. The letters were written in readable English, or open code. The more Elizabeth studied them, the more she suspected they were really about secret warship movements. Soon, she was certain that family referred to the enemy fleet of the Japanese warlords, and 3 English dolls were 3 classes of British warships. Elizabeth had broken the code and provided proof that Dickinson was a spy. The doll lady pled guilty for working for the Japanese. Because of Elizabeth's hard work, the war's #1 woman spy was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Then came messages that used ciphers created by Enigma, the advanced German code-making machine. With its rotating wheels, Enigma could create billions of different cipher alphabets. Every letter in the message was coded using a different alphabet. Cryptanalysts across the world raced to solve the tough Enigma codes. Just when it seemed Elizabeth and her team would never beat Enigma, they got a lucky break. A lazy Enigma operator didn't bother changing the start position of the wheels for each new message. The machine produced the same alphabet over and over. This was the opportunity Elizabeth's group needed. It wasn't easy and took months of work, but Elizabeth's team finally broke the supposedly unbreakable Enigma codes. Because of wartime secrecy, they didn't know that others, such as the British team led by now famous codebreaker Alan Turing, had also broken the codes. It was a bad time for the Nazis. How had Americans found out so many of their military secrets? Everyone knew the Enigma code was unbeatable. It was as if someone was eavesdropping on secret Nazi conversations. And in a way, Elizabeth and her team were doing just that. German secrets were no longer secret. Decoded transmissions gave the military advance warning of the Nazis' planned attacks and bombing raids. Historians are certain that by breaking the Enigma codes, Elizabeth and other code breakers in allied countries around the world saved thousands of lives and shortened the war by many years. Elizabeth knew how important it was to keep her work hush-hush. After all, lives depended on the enemy not knowing what she was doing. Because of this, the government classified all her work top secret ultra and placed it under lock and key in the National Archives. They threatened to put Elizabeth in jail if she spoke about her accomplishments, even to her husband, her children, or her 6 grandchildren. The government made her swear she would never tell anyone, and she never did. The last of Elizabeth's secrets were finally declassified in 2015, 35 years after her death. Elizabeth was a true heroine of both World War I and World War II. She is now considered one of the most gifted and influential code breakers of all time. Yet no one knows how many codes she broke, how many Nazis she stopped, how many Americans' lives she saved, until now. So it's pretty cool that she broke all of these codes and helped us in 2 different wars.